Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this annual event of the IMI Initiative for Media Innovation. We're very, very happy to be able to organize this annual event under the theme of helping media fight misinformation and restore the public's trust. And it is wise to say that this is definitely the main or the most important challenge any media needs to meet nowadays. We're very, very happy to be able to welcome you here physically, but as you would expect, it means that we have a few rules, a few safety measures due to COVID-19 that have to be respected. So I know you know all these rules, but we just have to go through them very briefly. The basic rules of physical distancing apply. You've got hydroalcoholic solution dispensers everywhere, so just make use of them. You are kindly reminded to use a protective mask, please, as you're all doing. Don't approach me, because I won't be wearing the mask. You've received one at registration if needed. The use of the mask is always mandatory inside the venue and in the cocktail area until you are seated. We'll go back to the information concerning the cocktail reception, but I know that I have to remind you that if you did register previously by email, you have to do so again here at the office for the cocktail later on. Each participant's contact details we collected at registration will be kept for 14 days exclusively for the use of the Continental Doctor's Office, and we've got advocates here of personal data protection. So for Olivier Dehaye, I'm telling you, these data will be destroyed after 14 days. And as I said, the cocktail is held seated. It will take place in the Hodler room inside the Rolex Learning Center, and it is accessible to participants if you have registered previously. And then again, you'll need a badge, so don't forget to go back to the office. Okay, this being said, we can now officially open this conference, this annual event. And to do so, I please welcome on stage the chairman of the IMI board and rector of Geneva University, Professor Yves Flukiger.
I think I can take my mask off. Maybe it will be better to speak. So, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you for this second annual event of the IMI. It's a pleasure for me to be here in presence because, as you know, the situation is quite difficult among the education institutions, but I think it's quite important that we can meet and we can present right afterward the first result of the research project that has been launched during the coming next months. For those of you who are not totally familiar with the IMI, with our initiative for media innovation, let me recall that the goal is to help media companies meet the challenges of digital society and to support research and innovation projects with our affiliated university, which means EPFL, and the three universities, Lausanne, Geneva, and Neuchâtel, as well as our affiliated universities, and partnership with our media members. 2 years ago, we met for the first annual conference to launch the center and to announce the first call for projects. Among the many projects that have received the support, then our scientific committee, in close collaboration with our board, has selected 6 of them, and you will be able to get some first result from these 6 projects this evening. And as you will see later on, the results are quite amazing, and I'm sure that it will be confirmed in the coming months. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout history, some of the greatest advances in science, in medicine, and in humanities have come out of the worst situations. Whatever the war, whichever the countries, in battle scientific advancements, remain and should remain a public good that will benefit all people involved. Now, and you know that, the latest war the world at large has faced is not between countries, but between mankind and a virus. We are at war, announced French President Emmanuel Macron on the 16th of March. A statement soon to be adopted to and by other world leaders across the globe as all nations began to acknowledge the severity of the coronavirus situation. However, despite the delay in political recognition of the virus, the scientific community was already on the front line. On the same date as Macron's declaration, the first phase trial for a vaccine for the novel coronavirus was announced. By the time politicians and the world at large began taking the virus seriously, scientists had already determined the full genome sequence of SARS-CoV-2, isolated it from clinical samples, and were on the hunt for drug combinations. The scientific community has risen to challenge before many others even recognize that it exists. While political leaders have locked their borders, scientists have been shattering there, creating a global collaboration unlike any in history. Never before have so many experts in so many countries focused simultaneously on a single topic and with such urgency. Nearly all of the research has ground to a stop. Many lessons can be learned from that period, and we have been now taking that lesson for us. Firstly, we have noticed that the scientific community has mobilized as never before to respond to the challenge posed to our society. This has been true not only in the field of life sciences, but also in the social sciences and humanities. Moreover, we were very pleased to note that many of the researchers involved in the IMI project have reoriented their research and worked to answer questions related to COVID. On the other hand, the health crisis has demonstrated the need for an ongoing, more intense dialogue between the scientific community, the public, and decision makers. However, for this dialogue to be fruitful and for experts to emerge from it strong, a number of conditions must be met. Firstly, it is necessary to ensure that experts develop communication skills, and we'll see that later on. Secondly, the population needs to understand better how scientific research is constructed, that it does not provide immediate answer to the questions asked, but that it is nourished by debate, contradiction, and that it advanced by trial and mistakes. Finally, the health crisis has demonstrated the urgent need for open and collaborative science, what we call open science. In this respect, I was very pleased to discover this morning, reading the newspaper Le Temps, the results of a survey carried out among a sample of the Swiss population. It shows that 85% of the leaders trust the experts, a percentage that is reduced to 63% among the general population, but which show that the word of the expert is necessary, respected, and heard. This result is even more significant when you compare this result with the scores obtained by leaders of GAFAMs or multinational companies. What's coming next for the IMI initiative? We will launch, hopefully, a new project, national project, called this National Project for Scientific Research, and with the support of Nathalie Pignard-Chenel, we are going to prepare this national research program on media innovation. That will be new steps for the IMI. It will be supported by the community of innovation and media, and we are going to also to get the support of the overall scientific community in Switzerland, and hopefully it will be decided next year that maybe the federal government will choose that topic to be one of the new program supported by the Swiss National Foundation for Scientific Research. So many things are to come, and I'm very pleased this evening to thank very much all the researchers who come today to present their first result. I'm sure that it's just the first step of something which is going to be built with the support of all our institutions. Thank you very much for your presence, and we're very much looking forward for the result of this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yves Pukiger. And we have a few welcoming words from Munir Krishan, the director of the IMI Initiative for Media Innovation. Big round of applause.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this word of welcome. Who would have thought that organizing an event during a pandemic would be such a wild ride? But seeing all of you here this afternoon, I remember why we did it. There is no substitute for human contact, even if we have to watch our distances and wear protective masks. A warm welcome to EPFL, and thank you all for being here with us today. A special thank you to Paul-Olivier Dehaye for accepting our invitation, to the researchers and journalists who will present the nature and results of their projects, to Nathalie Ducommun, who is once again by our side in this adventure, and finally to all who have made this event possible. Today, your well-being is our main concern. Therefore, please follow the protective measures in place to ensure everyone's safety. So as you know, the subject of today's event addresses a major issue, misinformation or fake news, and the need for traditional media outlets to restore trust among their audiences. This was the topic of our first call for projects, launched at the end of 2018. And today you will discover 6 projects that were selected and supported by the IMI. They all lasted between 12 to 14 months and are now coming to an end. But we are glad to see that already some are thinking or planning a follow-up project. For the IMI, selecting this topic was quite obvious, both because of the real impact that misinformation can have on the functioning of our societies and economies, but also because such a broad subject requires the intersection of many disciplines and invites researchers and journalists to join forces. So I'm obviously not going to reveal any details. I'll let that to the experts later on. However, I would like to give you an overview of the project and the many range of solutions they provide. So as part of these 6 projects, the first one studies how young people consume and share misinformation. The second one aims to understand the news ecosystem as a whole. The third one explores how misinformation disseminates The third one focuses on facts and the contextualization of information. The fourth one explores how misinformation disseminates through social networks. The fifth one aims at promoting and tracing editorial content using a label. And finally, the last one seeks to ensure public trust when content is delivered by algorithms. As you can see, this project covers many disciplines and include many collaboration between academic and media institutions. And finally, we're also pleased to announce that 2 of these projects have received partial support from the Ofcom. Beyond the project themselves, we're also aiming to build a bridge between scientific research and the world of media. And we are therefore proud that more than 50 people are involved in this project altogether. And this is actually not the full picture. Many faces are missing here. Students, researchers, journalists that also helped in these projects. Now we're all going through challenging and unpredictable times. And that is why we're very grateful to the project teams who were able to step up their efforts and find clever ways to complete their project on time and as planned. But challenges can also sometimes turn into opportunities. And the coronavirus has, of course, become a major subject of study and collaboration when it comes to misinformation for the majority of these 6 projects. As a result, Several new initiatives have emerged from these projects over the last few months. A data-driven article published by Le Temps, a survey on trust in information sources led by the universities of Geneva and Neuchâtel, and 2 projects developed during the LOSAC and Versus Virus hackathons. At the same time, we also wanted to launch and support new fast-track projects with our partners in order to diversify the type and scope of our innovation efforts. I'd like to show you a little bit what these projects are. One of them is looking at letting journalists collaborate on data sets using the Renku platform, which is maintained by the Swiss Data Science Center, hosted by EPFL and ETH. The second one, shown here on the right, is part of an international consortium led by the University of Sherbrooke in Canada, and is conducting a survey here in Switzerland on the relationship with misinformation, information, and media in the 3 main language regions of Switzerland. And now I would like to focus a little bit more on 2 of these fast-track projects that we have been developing during the summer. The first one, maybe you saw this one, is a partnership between the IMI, Le Temps, EPFL, and the University of Geneva. And it's a narrative video game that bears witness to the period of semi-confinement in Switzerland. The aim was to explore new storytelling formats and to reach younger audiences. This project also had an educational aspect, since it was carried out by 2 students and a young graduate, under the supervision of a researcher and a journalist. The source code for this project, as well as the images and sounds, are distributed under a free license. For instance, if you wish to translate the game in your language, and it is also on demo this evening, so be sure to check it out. The second project is not done yet. It's an ongoing project, an ongoing fast-track project. And we actually started a collaboration with Swisscom to study and report on the mobility and new habits of the Swiss population during the COVID-19 crisis. This is done with RTS and Le Temps. The example shown here comes from the Federal Office of Public Health. And as you can see, people stopped going to the zoo when the government took protective measures. I would like to point out that this data is anonymized and aggregated every hour on a grid where each square is 100 meters apart. So this is not to track people. But it will give us a little bit more details on how things changed during this pandemic. Now, before concluding, I would like to give you an overview of the next major projects that the IMI will support, and that should start in the coming weeks. Now, the first 2 on the left here were selected through our second call for project on the relationship and engagement of the public with media outlets. The first one will explore how public service media can initiate or re-establish a dialogue with young audiences using conversational interfaces. And the second one will seek to break filter bubbles by detecting or creating so-called bridging content. The 4 others on the right are from the IMI Research Grant, which is open for proposal twice a year on high-priority issues identified by the initiative. This is now replacing our thematic call for projects. And here, these 4 projects were selected just before the summer, and they will start this autumn. The first one will build a platform to simplify, speed up all the steps required to create data-driven content. This is a follow-up to one of the ongoing projects that's presented today. The second one will develop a recommendation engine that promotes regional diversity within SRG's new streaming platform called PlaySwiss. Now, the title of the third one is quite explicit. but it is actually a great example of cross-regional collaboration between the University of Geneva and SRF in Zurich, which will aim to refining the automatic translation of Swiss German dialects into standard German. And finally, the last one will develop an adaptive video player to automatically generate sports highlights based on user preferences and time constraint. This is a unique collaboration between an EPFL laboratory and a young startup from the campus. Now, more details on these projects will be available shortly on the IMI website, if you're interested. Now, finally, I would like to remind you that the next deadline for submitting project proposal is 15 October. Until then, I am of course available if you have any questions, but also to help with the proposal or to build partnerships. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to talking to you. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mounir. And now the pleasure and the honor to welcome on stage Paul-Olivier Dehaye. It's easy if you sit here. No, yeah, you need the
clicker.
Remote.
Thank you.
Is it easier if you're there or here?
Here.
Good. Paul-Olivier, everybody knows you because you've been in front of the British and European Parliament. You contributed notably in the investigation of the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal. I hope it's not as difficult to be talking here in front of the audience in the EPFL than in front of the European Parliament, or you'll survive it.
Yes.
You survived the British Parliament and the European Parliament?
Yes.
Okay. You're a mathematician, you're an advocate for protection of personal data. You are based in Geneva, where you are the founder of personaldata.io, and that organization focuses on data protection, of course. You're also the founder of My Data Global and My Data Geneva. We've been talking about the way now all the scientific community, not only, of course, in medicine, but everywhere, are focusing on COVID-19. Since the coronavirus has entered our daily lives, we've been more and more acquainted with new words, with new concepts, such as tracing contact, such as virus, of course, such as spreading the virus, clusters groups. And of course, this is quite an inspiring analogy for you as a mathematician and as someone that is very interested in data and the way that data can be traced. So I think you're going to use to start off this analogy with all these new words coming from the way we try to fight now the epidemic situation. And of course, I'll ask you a few questions about that. So,
yeah. So actually, what happened is that already during the Cambridge Analytica scandal, I was thinking very much about circulation of information over networks and what could be done about this. So this idea of disinformation, how would someone with a negative intent use data to influence populations? And to the extent that back in January, just before COVID, in before COVID times, I was giving a talk about disinformation in a big cybersecurity audience with a bunch of generals. And I had developed this idea that a very good analogy was in biology. But what I was saying was, well, let's all remember high school and thinking about cells and thinking about organisms, how information passes around. But it turns out that just a month or two later, we started talking about us as organisms circulating in a big network and information as DNA jumping from one of us to the other. So there is a lot of analogy, but actually there is more than just an analogy. There is real math, there is a real framework behind this. So that's what I want to start with here, is explain a little bit of the work that contact tracers are doing right now to try to understand the virus and how to most effectively try to limit its propagation, which the goal should be pretty clear. So this is actual data, but from the Canton Geneva, but with filters to make sure that it's a non-representative sample, that it's anonymized, that there's noise added, there's all kinds of things that have been done. But what I will say about it is still representative and still, I don't think it is misleading. It's not completely real data, but what I'll say is not misleading either. So what you see here, I need to give you a quick chart to understand this. In taupe, in brown, those rounds are people, all right? And you see two types, small ones and big ones. The small ones are infected. The big ones are, we don't know. They're not being tested right now, but they're sitting in quarantine somewhere. Or they were at the time this slide was made. And between any two people, take two brown dots, in between there is some very colorful dot. And this is a common contact or a common context for them to interact. So in purple, you see those are social contacts. I know this, I'm just telling you quickly. In blue, light blue, it's unknown. In green or dark green, it's more related to work. And those smaller blue dots are co-residents, people who live together. All right? And so you see that there are indeed clusters that are forming, like here at the bottom. You see that there is a bunch of people. Of course, this is a partial view. The contact tracers don't know everything about how the virus propagated. So that's interesting. What's also interesting is what happens there at the top. You see this big dot surrounded by three others of different colors. So this person is really unlucky because they have three different reasons to be in quarantine at the moment, right? So they have three different types of contacts, one at work, one social contact, and then one that is unqualified, empty data if you want, but there is a contact with someone who is infected. But they themselves are not known to be infected. So the most rational explanation, and this might show you how this could be useful, is that this person is actually asymptomatic, but is infected as well. They're just not being tested at the moment. So why am I... Oh, and another important element is this purple dot surrounded by a black box. This is slightly different. It's a bit like those co-working, co-living environments. It's contexts that involve multiple people. So this is actually a party that has been recorded through the Koga app that is relevant in Geneva, that is used in Geneva. So in a sense, there are two types of common context. There's a friendship context on a social network, and then there's belonging to a group kind of relationship where multiple people are in the same situation. Now, what's the link with fake news? Well, we have a very partial view. We don't understand enough about COVID at the moment. But this is a much more global view that is coming out of Brazil, and that shows what actually, how you should think about it actually. You should think about the propagation of COVID when you actually have substantial amounts of data. And you see that there are those clusters there with philanderous connections with other clusters, right? I ask you to compose a graph randomly, like truly randomly, it's not going to look like that. This is really exceptional among the set of all possible graphs. So why is this? Why is there this particular pattern? Well, it turns out that COVID has some specific characteristics that are also relevant in the fake news context, and I'll explain that the relevance in a second. But we know that there are super spreader events. We know that suddenly some people, for unknown reasons at the moment, will infect 10, 15 other people. It's less said, but we also know that some people infect no one. They are infected, but they don't infect anyone. So that the average is 3 people or something like that. So there is an enormous amount of variance around those 3, and we don't really know why. The analogy is, for fake news, some content will have enormous propagation despite being false, and we don't really know why. Right? But this hints at techniques that could be used to actually recover or fight back this epidemic of either COVID or fake news, which is to trace the origin. Because if you do that, then you gain more and more information about you walk back in time with the virus and you bias your search towards instances where those clusters might have occurred. So the analogy on social networks fighting disinformation is to always work really hard at finding the source, but also at understanding what information is actually missing so that you can do that more effectively and you can optimize the processes in order to fight disinformation. So on the left, you have this abstract view of contacts. On the right, you have these contacts placed through GPS on a map. So I want to say a little bit more about how this data was produced, because I think it's interesting and somewhat unfortunately relevant to this audience. So this data is GPS data that comes through what's called an SDK, so a software development kit that is integrated in apps. In Brazil, this company Grandata that is collecting, in this case, precise profiling data about individuals, GPS data that allows enough precision. GPS is not very precise, but it allows enough precision to know who is in contact with whom. And on top, this is correlated with anonymous health data, meaning health data released by a public authority in order to further research, I think. But researchers are able to align the two and to figure out where the clusters actually are. Now, I said this was unfortunately relevant because actually, if you investigate, and this is kind of what I do with volunteers that I want to actually thank today here, if you investigate a little bit this ecosystem of data collection, you realize that a lot of apps from the Groupe Ringier are actually collecting this GPS data as well. So they're collecting this GPS data through an intermediary called InLoco, which is also in Brazil, which is tied to other actors. And I've been very vocal against SwissCovid, against the application SwissCovid. This is the kind of things that worries me. There are actors in this room or in the Groupe Ringier that actually collect data that could be used, that would be very relevant against the epidemic. Maybe that's desirable or not. There are Bluetooth beacons being sent around for SwissCovid that are the equivalent of this anonymous health data. But we have no real control over this. We don't really know who in this ecosystem might be using this. And so this is the jump that I'm making with SwissCovid of why I'm opposing in certain ways. One of the reasons why I'm opposing its use.
Just before we go back to the different examples you gave and the analogy about SwissCovid, there's probably a main or central question is the end, that is the goal of SwissCovid. If you compare it to a way we want to collect data in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example, had bad reasons for it. Here, we know that SwissCovid has an aim to help us fight COVID-19. So, does the means justify?
Yeah. So I'm not advocating for huge centralization of data either. So I wrote an op-ed in Le Monde opposing the French way, which was very centralizing. The initial title was COVID Analytica, because the parallel was extremely clear there that this was the same strategy. SwissCovid has a different strategy. It's much more making an attempt at not centralizing data. But I would argue that it has also built a false enemy in the Swiss state that is trying to collect this data potentially to help in the epidemic context. Reduced the problem to just that one, simplified it with partly an engineering mindset and set out to solve the simplified problem. But it doesn't take into account at all this ecosystem of commercial surveillance. It just considers state surveillance as a danger. But there is that ecosystem of commercial surveillance. So the risk is not zero. And that risk should be balanced.
But it's not intentionally.
No, it's not intentionally.
It has to be said, though.
There is a risk that I would argue there is a risk. I'm not saying it's intentional.
Good.
Right. But this has to be balanced against utility. Right? So is SwissCovid potentially helpful? And that's another question. And if I may, I will use the analogy of fake news and its circulation and all of that. It's a question of, do you want to try to convince people that in their direct relationship with each other, there should be some form of mediation, however distant, by a state intermediary, because we don't want fake news to propagate? Or do you actually want to concentrate on groups where this disinformation circulates, or contexts that are leading to this additional propagation? And I think it's actually the second answer. And the response is pretty clear in the context of the epidemic. It's in Geneva, clubs have been closed for a while because this is a place where increased propagation could occur, right? So what's the response? Well, the response is to be very serious about the data collection. It's this big tool, the big round thing that we have at the top. If there is an event, we should be able very quickly to find everyone. So you were saying, today we registered, we came, we entered our name. So this data will be destroyed in 14 days. Great, I have no reason not to believe it. But the real question to me, having talked to the contact tracers in Geneva, is also how quickly can they get to this data? Because it has to be really good, really well done for them to be able to reach out in time to this data. And the problem that I see now is that, at least in Geneva, I don't know how it's in Lvov, in Geneva, the clubs have an obligation of collecting data very well. The Geneva Canton has paid for an app that helps clubs to do it for free, all of that, great. But if you go to gyms, if you go to this and that, it becomes a mess. You know, it's sheets of paper where people introduce, like, I'm James Bond, my number is 077, and so, 007, and so on. So it's complete junk. And that's a problem because when the contact tracers make this reasoning about where could there have been a super spreading event, they're investing time. They're investing time thinking about it. And if they find this event, they show up to the person and say, now give us the list. And they realize this list is junk. This is a huge loss of resources for them. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the tracing is not as efficient as it should be.
The tracing is not as efficient. It hasn't been explained to people why it's important. And so it's not taken seriously.
Well, let's go back, if you mind, to the analogy with fake news.
Yeah, sure.
Are they fake news super spreaders? As they are COVID super spreaders. They don't have the real symptoms. You can't identify them straight away, but they do spread. How do you identify the super spreaders in fake news?
So I think, like the virus, there are environments that are more conducive to mutual repeated inoculations or something like this. So there are those bubbles where people progressively get steered towards a certain way of thinking. And then they behave like you see here. There is those.
So you can identify a cluster the same way.
There is a cluster where people mutually infect each other with ideas that are completely crazy, and then they just spread slowly and philandrously, you know, like philanders, like long tails or whatever you want to call it, into other groups where this information will propagate again. We know this pattern, actually. We know it. If you look at the autism and vaccine misinformation, well, we're going to see that merge very, very quickly with completely other different conspiracy theories. We're going to see those clusters find each other and just progressively go into a bigger and bigger space of misinformation. I mean, if you look at some of the, I'm against the current way Swiss COVID is being deployed, but if you look at some other people who are against it, they also have beliefs that are just completely insane, simply said. But this becomes a big umbrella because people don't really understand this thing, and they're trying to make sense, and from the echo chambers they make a certain sense of the world.
So that means that tracing, as you said before, again, analogy, time is playing against us, and we're not always tracing the more efficiently possible. So we've got loads of projects, and we're going to discover them, that are trying to trace and proposing solution in tracing. Are we good at it today? Do we have a model? Do we know how we trace fake news in these clusters? How we can find them easily?
Right. So I'm sorry, I'll have to again take an example from COVID because I think it helps. So Gaël Hurliman, who is the vice redacteur,
web rédacteur en chef of the Temps.
Right. So he just said on Twitter he had been infected, and he's now in isolation, I guess. So I talked to him a little bit on Twitter and tried to figure out exactly. And it turns out that he knows a huge amount of things about the potential setting where he got infected, just because he knows that last weekend he did nothing and so on. So just because of that, actually, he's very helpful to put some kind of causal relationship between the events around him. That's a main problem with COVID, is you don't have a causal relationship, because I could infect you, but you would have symptoms before I do. And that means you have this graph here in the end where you don't have any arrows. You don't know which direction it goes in, right? So with Gaël, that's different. It's quite likely that from his situation, we could infer who infected him. right? So this causal link is crucial. And for fake news, it is actually what we should strive for. This is the common framework to understand things, is can we infer causation in the propagation of information? So in some ways, it's a lot easier, because if you look at some Facebook post that reaches you, you know who posted it, it's there, right? But what you don't know is the exact path that it has followed. You might know the person before because you see this person reshared, but you don't know the person before that, right? So you cannot trace the whole thing. It just lands on your Facebook feed, comes out of nowhere, you know the source, you know the last step, but you don't have any clue about the intermediary. So that's exactly the place where we should try to see methodologically, really step by step, what is the exact information we need in order to be able to understand more. And it's crucial that we do this work ahead of time so we can have a concerted demand, not just a polite request, but a concerted demand from platforms. This is the information we need in order to better understand the propagation of news. The alternative is we just say, there is a fake news problem, and we get Mark Zuckerberg who says, don't worry, we'll fix it. I don't think that dynamic really works. Up to people.
Yeah, up to people to decide, but I think we would all agree. Does it mean there can be an analogy on the question of the vaccine? We're all waiting for the vaccine for COVID. Would there be a vaccine for fake news, or is that the end of the comparison and we will have to stop to the tracing analogy, really, when it comes to fake news?
I think we should much more focus on the process to live with fake news, to live with COVID. So what are the processes we need to have in place in order to mitigate, contain, all of that vocabulary, the virus or the fake news propagation? So, and that would mean, in my view, this whole process of, there's new disinformation patterns. What are they? What is the information we need to us make sense of this and not leave that knowledge exclusively to the platforms? That means
we have to rely on individual responsibility.
There is an element of that. So I think there is an element of that, yes, because you were asking me, are there super spreader of fake news? There could be super spreaders, like you see in Finland and in some other countries, of counter fake news. People who take it as their responsibility to actually fact check in a distributed way, right? And who are it's explained to them based on rational, measured arguments. These are good tactics to fight against fake news. You could even imagine short-circuiting like certain steps by reaching out to influencers to explain, to be the vaccine in a sense, by their own behavior.
Counter the wrong data,
Right, so watch out, you are quite an influencer, you have propagated this information and so on. These are the exact patterns that it follows. Partly because, it's not going to reach to them directly, probably, but their environment, people around them, around those influencers, some of them will understand this better, will see the role they're playing in society and will try to shape them as well.
So again, we can conclude that we're not very optimistic in stopping fake news and eliminating it completely from our networks, but we have to learn to live with it, and we have to learn, find ways of tracing it and fighting it, being able to counter it by spreading other information, right information.
Yep.
We only have a few minutes, but probably people that are conducting the projects we're going to discover more in detail in a while. Probably there would be some questions you would have liked to ask now to Paul Olivier. Would you agree on that?
Yes.
I know there's a microphone somewhere. Est-ce que quelqu'un... it's there, sorry. Of course, you'll be all able to be networking informally and talking together later on, but is there one question that wants to be addressed now? If not, let's take the projects, and then you'll probably discuss with Paul Olivier later on. Thank you ever so much to have been with us and for your speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's now time to discover, well, you've made quite a detailed presentation of the different projects of this initiative for media innovation. We'll start with the first one, fake news audiences and journalism. And I think, I'm even sure that it's Professor Nathalie Pignard-Chenel and Sébastien Salerno that are meeting us. So we'll have each project giving us a brief, a few minutes, 5-6 minutes description of what is being done and probably first results or methods that are being used. And later on, of course, you'll be able to know more about these projects, discuss, ask all your questions, because they've all got their demonstration at the back. So, Sébastien and Nathalie, your turn.
Thank you. Do you have to keep the mask? Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. So my name is Nathalie Pignard-Chenel, and I'm very happy with my colleague Sébastien Salerno to present our project done in partnership with Le Temps and with the collaboration of Vincent Carlino, who is here, and Jan Rieder.
Is it easier? Can we use this one?
So the main focus of our research was to analyze the news practices of young audiences, their expectations in terms of content and news formats, and more specifically their exposure to fake news and their opinion about it.
So to carry out this project, we combined several social science methods, from individual interviews and focus group with young people, 18 to 25, to large surveys about news practices during the COVID-19 lockdown in Switzerland. You have here an overview of the research, which consists of 5 phases. We will focus just on one phase, phase 3, the most experimental, maybe also the most visual one, which aimed to design news formats for young audiences by young audiences.
Thank you. For this phase, we conducted a workshop with students in journalism at the Académie du journalisme et des médias in Neuchâtel, with Le Temps, of course, and with a coach journalist, Charles-Henri Groux, who is head of video at Le Monde in France. So the challenge for our students was to work on editorial concepts for young people. And for that, they used our material, our research material, and specifically our research from the focus group with young people. They also worked on grammars and narratives specific to some platforms like Instagram and TikTok. And finally, what was very important for us was to encourage our students to play with formats, with the codes of this platform, as it's in the 2 videos, while of course respecting the editorial line and the identity of our media partner, Le Temps.
Okay. So we are going to show you now 2 examples of formats. Focus groups and quantitative surveys showed that young people are aware and agile, also confronted with fake news. What interests them is not so much knowing what is true, what is false, but rather the mechanism of fake news, why they appear, how they spread, and what benefits they served. Very important, what benefits they served. The students have imagined an anti-fake challenge that takes up the codes of Instagram, a little bit of Snapchat also. The students created 3 pilots that served as a content test during our research. So maybe we can see a video, just 1-minute video, if it's possible.
Salut à tous, c'est lundi, j'espère que vous allez bien, que vous êtes bien réveillés. 4e étape de notre anti-fake challenge du temps. Aujourd'hui, on va bosser sur les deepfakes. Et pour bien commencer, regardez ça.
Relic from a distant day that long since should have died away, dishonorably mentioned is the pitiful impressionist.
Un deepfake, c'est en fait une technique basée sur l'intelligence artificielle qui superpose un fichier sur une vidéo existante et ça permet de faire dire à des gens n'importe quoi, comme à Kim Jong-un qu'il aime la fondue.
J'adore la fondue! J'adore la fondue!
Selon des chercheurs aux États-Unis du MIT, les deepfakes sont une arme parfaite pour déstabiliser les marchés financiers, voire même influencer directement des élections politiques. En septembre 2019, on estimait que 14 000 deepfakes circulaient sur le net et 96% d'entre elles sont à caractère pornographique. Emma Watson ou Scarlett Johansson en ont par exemple fait les frais.
To introduce the second video, I will give you 2 results of our survey. First, young people are interested in news. They are also familiar with legacy media. They consider them of quality. This is good news. The bad news is that they don't feel represented by them nor by their journalists. They think them as, I would say, old white men, to caricature. Our students so try to explore a form of proximity or even of relatability of young people toward journalists, like a mirror effect. And as you will see now, this is a very short format. It is thought for TikTok, but it could be seen as one element of a more horizontal and maybe dialogical approach of news.
Salut, moi c'est Maria-Maëlle, j'ai 24 ans, je suis journaliste web autant, mais je suis aussi un peu footballeuse. Tennis, natation, le sport ça me permet de me défouler, surtout après une longue journée de travail. Je joue depuis que je suis à l'Uni, mais j'ai aussi longtemps joué au quartier comme on dit. Maintenant, je joue au FC Champel. Je suis défenseuse et mon numéro, c'est le 5. Et je vous cache pas qu'il m'arrive de venir en training à la rédaction. Le lundi c'est plutôt tenue civile, le mardi c'est plutôt training. Ça choque personne à la rédaction, ça fait partie de ma personnalité. Des fois c'est Real Madrid. Autant vous dire que mes tenues suscitent toujours de vifs débats au sein de la rédaction. Mais bon, de toute façon, mes collègues sont tous des footix. Et pourtant, je ne suis pas journaliste sportive. Mes amis pensent souvent que c'est le cas. Ça arrive même à mes collègues de me surnommer Neymar. Bon allez, ciao, c'est l'heure de l'entraînement.
Maybe better to see it on a smartphone, not on a big screen, but you can see other formats in the area demonstration.
Okay, so we've done. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much to the IMI. And we're happy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you can meet Sébastien and Nathalie later on just behind and do that because it's really interesting. Media Observatory Initiative, and it's brought to you by Jérémy Rappa from the EPFL. Thank you, Jérémy. It's your turn.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It feels really good to remove this thing, so. Whew. I'm Jérémy Rappa. I'm a PhD student here at EPFL, and I'm really excited to tell you a bit about our initiative called Media Observatory. And this is a partnership between EPFL and Le Temps. I have plenty of things to tell you, so I will dive straight away. So I think this year we learned a few lessons, and some of which are about how brittle our communication systems are, especially online. And I think it really emphasizes why we need journalism to investigate, to bring up facts, to bring expertise, and to contextualize what we're seeing online. I would easily argue that what we're seeing online, and especially social platforms, is not built for quality journalism, but for monetizing user attention. So it means that people that are consuming content through those platforms have a hard time distinguishing between quality content and misleading information. And sadly, we know what happened to such a market in which the consumer cannot really, assess the product quality. It could depress the entire market. And of course, I mean, this is a theoretical result, but I think it applies to the current information market. We interacted during the year with a lot of researchers, journalists, students, etc. And I think everyone agrees that the problem of trust and misinformation is a multifaceted problem, and that there is no single solution to this problem. So we are providing Orbit, and what we chose to work on during this year is by providing value to the public and to the audience. We created one platform to stream, collect, and serve news articles. So it's a place that serves only news articles. And we would like to really give a service to the public. I mean, we would like to provide value to the public. And so we could also provide indicators and feed control. So we want to provide a platform on which you are in total control. You can, if you see something there, it's because you chose it, not because it's the byproduct of a very obscure algorithm. And so we would like to also add, indicator about quality and credibility of channels. We built a very complex data pipeline that streams millions of articles and reactions per month. And so we hope to, by doing so, to promote and make sustainable research in this domain. I have only 5 minutes, but I would still like to give you a glimpse of some methods that we are doing on the platform. And I would like to give you one example, which is an algorithm that is trying to guess who wrote an article. So basically, this algorithm takes as an input some textual information, so an article that has been written, right? And we are trying to make him guess who's the source. And by doing so, we can observe various very interesting patterns. So for example, we can detect syntactic patterns, right? So in this example, this is BFM TV, right? And apparently they overuse the term vraiment, which means really in French. And of course, I mean, we can debate if this is a good journalistic practice or not. But at least we can detect such small patterns with this method. We can also make emerge thematic patterns. So I took the example of Le Temps that I think it was this month, published several articles about Swiss dialects, so patois. And since this is original content, I mean, I don't think that there are a lot of news channels that discuss about Swiss dialects, right? So this is detected as original content and is attributed to Le Temps. So we extract specific characteristic from news channels. The ultimate goal of the method is to have a complete map of the information landscape. So for example, you can see an example here of this map. And the zoom here, you can see the US channels that are all grouped together. Please pay attention to USA Today and Des Moines Register, which are two news sources that are both far-right and owned by the same company. So this is something that has been captured by the method. We worked a lot with Le Temps, investigating about alternative media channels. And one of the characteristics that first appear is the fact that they provoke a lot of reaction online. So this is something that we now monitor. So you can see the alternative media channel in orange, where you have this sort of linear characteristic that are from the traditional media. So this is something we now monitor in real time on the platform. We experimented also a new way to communicate around the topic of information diffusion. So this is one article that we published in Le Temps that integrates some data aspect in it. So of course, I mean, we were a bit experimenting with that. So this one in particular is about the mediatization of around COVID-19. And we also collaborated to investigate misinformation on the network. So we published one open source tool to observe a bit the polarization around specific issues on Twitter. So let me conclude with some results. So from yesterday, we are online. You can find our platform at this address, newsteller.io. I mean, newsteller. Yeah, it's correct. I have a phone problem. We involved more than 10 collaborators, journalists, engineers, students, so perhaps that's what matters with this project. So I would like to thank all my collaborators and everyone involved in this project. I mean, I'm very proud of what we achieved. And the platform is online. We are collecting millions of articles per month that are still indexed. So this will continue. And we'll gradually open source our method in the following weeks. As Munir was saying, we'll continue this project, both with Le Temps, but also with AGM, with Nathalie. And we'll be rethinking about formats, so we'll integrate data into news article in a more principled way, let's say. And we'll also find ways to involve experts automatically into the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to discuss with all of you during the break. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And now the third project with Agathe Chevalier from the web platform Avis d'Experts. How can these resources between media and scientific expertise can be shared? It's your turn. The microphone, I think it's still there. Let me just hand you some.
There are actually 3, so
use it after.
Yeah, okay. So, thank you very much, Nathalie. I'm very pleased and honored to be presenting in front of you today our project, which aimed at helping journalists identify expert knowledge in real time. When we look for information, we never see the big picture. We only skip the surface of news. We look at the first few occurrences in Google and we ignore the million potentially relevant data that is in the rest of the pages. How can we find our way in this sea of information? And more specifically, how can we help journalists identify robust, relevant expert information in the sea in the waves of all this information that is coming every day? We decided to create a compass, a way for journalists to find their way in that environment, and we called it Compascience. Compascience is a practice-driven tool. It connects knowledge, expert, and media content. Specifically, let's take a small example so you can have an idea of what it's doing. Let's imagine that a journalist like Nathalie here has been asked to produce a piece of news regarding genetic manipulation of embryos, for instance. So what she will do is she will enter the term embryo in our system, and she will find the semantic network, all the data that is compiled, and the semantic network around that term. As she browses through it, she finds the word ethics. Because it matches her topic, she will enter it also in the search. And she obtains a new map with both terms and their semantic network. Then she can look for experts, and they appear on the map in purple. She decides to maybe focus on the term bioethics, which is logical regarding the topic that she wants to cover, and then explore the experts that are around this. Maybe she decides to check out Professor Samia Hurst, and then she can see Professor Hurst's associated terms. They are relevant to the topic that she wants to cover. Then she can go and see all the shows in which Professor Hurst recently spoke. This way she can ensure that she doesn't make redundant news, but actually produces a new kind of information. If she's interested, she can listen to the first topic, which is the one that is most relevant, and then, which is on Avis d'Experts, and then she can go and listen to see Professor Hurst's page on Avis d'Experts and all her media interventions. Finally, she can go to the university page where she can get Professor Hurst's contact details. So as you see, we went from having a specific topic given to a journalist to the whole field of information, and back to the specific expert that can help that journalist put the information into context. So how did we do this? Well, we compiled a number of corpuses. The first and central one is Avis d'Experts. Avis d'Experts is a database that gathers all information, all topics in which researchers from the higher institution, knowledge institution of Swiss Romand speak about when they come to Radio-Télévision Suisse. So the real key here to understand the difference between other projects that we've seen so far is that we transform audio and video information into text to be able to analyze this. We had to have also, so with Avid Expert, we could identify all the experts, but we didn't have their semantic field. So we needed the semantic fields. To do this, we needed a semantic base, a lexicon, and we used Wikipedia. And we then added all these shows that were on Radio-Télévision Suisse for the past 7 years, and all the articles of Le Temps for the past 7 years. So these are the corpuses that we worked with. Then we use an iterative process of two complementary and original approaches. One, computational social science, so machine learning of semantic networks, and a second process of in-depth manual qualitative analysis of subsets of data to constantly improve machine learning. And this way we could produce this system called Compascience. So it's a powerful tool set to produce robust media content and help journalists identify the right expert at the right time to produce their topic. But it's more than that, because it's also useful for the medias. Here what you see on that map is a strategic map of how two medias, in red you have Le Temps, and in blue you have Avid Expert, and that's their respective semantic maps. And you can see that they don't address information the same way. If you look at Avid Expert, there's a lot of information. Here we can read very well, but there's a lot of information about science and medicine. And if you look at Le Temps, there is a lot of economical information. They overlap in the yellow patches, but they have some very specific outlook on news in general. So you can see the way a media is looking at news. And you can also, this is the very macro strategic picture, but we can also go to the very specific user recommendation level and make very specific contextual information for users. It's also useful for experts like university professors and departments, because they can see their own field in the public sphere, and they can see their own interventions in that field and see how journalists see them and how they intervene, and they can see if they missed something or not from what they are usually studying. It's useful for educators to identify course content and use media information as a course content, and we've already had several requests to do that. And finally, it's useful for decision makers to identify the right experts to make policy recommendations when they need to find them for their work. So as you see, it's useful for all kinds of stakeholders beyond its first target, which is journalists. So thank you very much for your attention. And I have to say I've been extremely honored and proud to work with this team of people who were a very dedicated and passionate team. And we look forward to showing you this project and also all the developments that we have. This is just the beginning for us. We have many new ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ayat. Thank you. And the fourth project, and I have a feeling we'll be seeing again some clouds very similar to COVID cluster groups. It's about the social network architectures of disinformation. It's Benjamin Ricot, there he is, that is bringing us this project from EPFL.
Thank you. Okay, this is my project. Hello, everyone. So the main idea of the project #SAD was the following. A design of a smart assistant that could help find your way inside a social network. So imagine you are in front of this enormous, gigantic social network, and you want to know what is going on about a particular topic. So you could just select a few keywords, a few hashtags, for example. Or if you know one user or a few users that are talking about this topic inside the network, you just give that to the program, and the program will explore for you the network, follow the links, the connections, sort and filter what is relevant to the topic and brings you a map or a subnetwork focused on the topic. So it's sort of map where you have dots and connections. Each dot would be a user talking about the topic. Connection, the user will be the key actor of the debate, let's say, on the topic. You will be a connection that will be the key interaction. So they argue, answer, and question each other. They also give you the keywords used, so the vocabulary they use to discuss about the topic. And it gives you this graph so that you can see if there is communities. So if the topic is very controversial and there is two big groups well connected within each other but not together, or if there are several more communities around, if there are also topics that are correlated or connected but not really the topics you are looking for. And with that, then it's up to you to explore more about this network, click on the user, see who they are, what they are talking about, what kind of posts they did. So it gives you a broader view of the topic inside the social network. So to do that, we faced several challenges. And the first one was it's an extremely huge network. So there is a lot of data to handle. This is a big problem. The second one is the fact that connection, or let's say discussion, are complex because users are very well connected between each other. And you see that when the information is spreading very easily. And also, for a user, for example, in a particular day, this user could talk about sport, then a movie has just seen, and COVID-19 just after. So you have a mix of topics, which is very difficult to separate. And on top of that, you also have the fact that the social network platform, they don't want to share all the data with you. So you have a limited access to it. And you also have a privacy concern because the user, they do not want you to go too deep inside their private life. So you have to also see this constraint. So you have an enormous network, but you have a limited access to it. So is it possible to understand what is going on inside and get key insight about particular topics? And that was the question. We as a team tried to answer. And yes, we brought new solution to get these insights inside the network. So you have this big network, and our tool is extracting the part of a particular topic. Then I don't go to the detail because I don't have time, how it is made, but you are very welcome to come to our demo just after and ask questions. So just to give you a small picture, the tool is inside the browser, and then you get, when you choose a few user or a few hashtags, then you get this network where the dots are user, the connection are their retweet or mention, because we focus on Twitter. You have colors that are communities that were automatically detected and separated. For each community, you can have word cloud. Then you can get the idea of what they are talking about in a community. You have the interaction, and you have also several buttons that allows you to have different perspectives on the network, and then help you to find your information inside it. Thank you.
We were talking about tracing the virus, the cluster groups, tracing also original journalistic content, and not only tracing fake news. It's presented by Mathieu Delalleuil and Sébastien Hersan for the 5th project.
Good evening. Okay. I'm Sebastian, and I will be presenting with Mathieu this evening, and we are very pleased to show you a little bit of what we've done with the trustable original journalistic content. I'll be talking about business need and objectives, and Mathieu will talk a little bit more about methodology and findings, right? Okay. Let's do it. Okay. Yeah. So for the business need, the digital world, in the digital world, sorry, articles are produced and distributed on a media platform, travel. They go from search engines to social networks before ending up, in the best of cases, shared via a messaging application. If we can salute this great agility, we can also regret that the journey doesn't go smoothly. Indeed, it is known. An article loses its substance when it leaves its original digital setting, in this case, the media website. For instance, in 2K16, a study led by the University of Columbia revealed that 60% of shared content is not read. It is doubtful that little importance is attached to the author or the editorial staff or the issuing media. Needless to say that the existence of deontological rules is ignored. Yet those rules allow us to distinguish journalistic content from any other, such as fake news, for example. Let us not go so far as to refuse the entertaining aspects of the latter, but let us recall here the weakness of its informative character. But quality information is the livelihood of the local press, whose digital business model is based on subscriptions. The question then we are trying to answer with HSSO is how can we distinguish and enhance the value of journalistic content beyond its original platform. Our assumption is that a label could be an answer, though our objectives are to understand the impact of the introduction of a label on the Swiss readership, identifying the economic potential linked to it, and finally, set up a secure authentication and traceability system for original content. Mathieu.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I would like to thank you, Sébastien Arsan, and also the whole ECH media group for these contextual elements and also for the supporting us as a media partner. So, who has never chosen a press article according to the media that publish it? We all agree here that the media brand has a very, very important impact. Is it often visible on the website, but becomes more discreet on search engine and social media? They are the ones who manage the flows of online visitors. The project presented here is ongoing and follows an applied research methodology. We are interested here in how to build trust and valorize journalistic original content to fight fake news through a label. The case study is based on online written content. Yeah, not so fast. We start first to understand the readership behavior. So that's really important because when we speak about the label, this label has to be used. So we would like to understand the behavior of the readership. With some qualitative interviews that give us highly relevant results, we find like a wide divergence of opinion on the readership ability to assess the quality of information online. In this case, a label seems relevant. On the recommendation of the Scientific Advisory Board, we studied the various existing work, as you can see on the bottom of this slide, as like the Trust Project, also the GTI from Reporters Sans Frontières. We were also able to rely on the IMI network and especially Academy of Journalism of the University of Neuchâtel and the University of Geneva on sharing results, and we would like to thank them. One finding is this process diagram. It shows two different steps. The first one on the left and the second one on the right. The first one allows the media to follow existing label as trust project. These rules can improve the impact of the article online and improve the referenced online. Secondly, we have developed a unique tool to label a certain type of content using automated approaches. This approach provides guidance to editors on what to highlight. The label is then generated in accordance of the state-of-the-art standards of traceability and high security. Content labeling is not simple, as you can imagine, and must follow some criteria. So we have done like a huge state-of-the-art of the standards of the traceability, and we found like 6 different categories of this criteria. As you can see, transparency and funding, author, work method, nature of content, sources, interactivity. These criteria, we have challenged it also with the editors and our media partners to feel if it's fit to the market or not. This is the first step, and then we conduct also as an IT research institute based in Valais. We have the experience on software development, and we developed a unique tool based on automated approaches and give us the power to editors to manage label. Each article is unique and can be traced. This functional prototype can be tested on our booth just behind, and we look forward to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the 6th project is focusing on trust and artificial intelligence. It is brought to you by Nicolas Anchaud, the director of the EPFL and Nickel Lab, and the EPFL professor Daniel Gatica Perez.
Thank you. It's great. We're in advance. I'll take this. So we have half an hour. That's. No, you don't. Ah. 5 minutes. We'll stay there. Okay. So thank you very much. I will present this project with Daniel Gatica Perez. We work together on this project. So first, I'll start with perhaps to clarify, because we had several presentations and sometimes start to be a bit difficult to understand what means trust and how we look at the problem. The first point is that we try to work on 2 major issues for media. It's engagement, because if you don't have engagement, you go nowhere. And then to have trust. Why trust? It has been said many times, but it's really the factor number 1, according to the World Media Congress, for the evolution of the media business. So it's something that has really impact. What we look at in a special way, it's about automatic aggregation. And not only from the user point of view, taking a platform which is provided by an external big player, but because the media themselves will use and start to use this aggregation platform. And there's a lot of reason for this. You enrich the content, you can contextualize information, you can involve the audience, and you can also valorize your media capital, your archive. So it brings really a strong richness. But with the issue of fake news, fake news is not only somebody who wants really to send a fake news. It's also when you aggregate in not very accurate way things, you generate a fake news. It's not an intentional one, but it will be a fake news. And that's a problem in terms of trust. And when you use AI, because when you are dealing with massive data, it's not 100% accurate. It's about probabilistic things. So we need to understand how media can work better with this tools of aggregation. But then there's a second point, is the trust is not something which is linked to the performance of the tool only. It's a perception of the user. And just want to remind you that the Swiss people to show how subjective it is. The Swiss people accepted by votation the Swiss biometric passport by only 51.9%. That was just a couple of years ago. Because they were frightened about the security issue of the fingerprints at the Confederation, the size and the blue eyes. At the same time, they're putting everything on the Camillus card and everything on Google. So you see that there's a lot of subjectiveness in terms of perception. And you can have the best tool if it's not perceived by the end user, you have no perceived added value. So we work in two phases. The first phase was really about engagement, and here we aggregate information from different sources. It was the case of the Fête des Vignerons, but in a physical installation. That was not in the IMI project itself. It was the start before. Why physical installation? Because we can witness how people behave. We can also create social engagement. We can work with different tools, and when we do physical operation with the media, it's really an inspiration for what we can do in the digital world. So based on this observation, we were able to see that we can get impact on engagement and perception. So here we're using already AI tools to aggregate this content, and we're already showing some metadata to the public. We saw that it's really dependent from the context of presentation, that the image is a very strong way to engage with people in this aggregator, and that we could have a global increase in content value. So based on this, we're able to move, and that was really the IMI project, on something which is really focusing on online, very specific online platform and trust. And here we make very specific markups. So we had two hypotheses. The first one is to structure the media by sources. That's coming also from the literature. Can we gain trust by this, by showing first the sources of information? And the second thing is how we can use the indicators of the aggregation to increase the transparency. We made an experiment with 6 different layouts, and the whole project, I must say, was done by Hélène Portier and with the whole EPFL ECALAB team. She's here, so we can discuss with her later. And here we really had these 6 layouts based on very minimalistic design to have very specific parameters where we could study the impact of user. Here we had more than 200 people online due to the COVID testing, and we could show that on the design part, the media saturation is really significant, that the indicators have impact, but not always how we could think they have, because you have strong bias in terms of perception issues. For instance, what's the impact of the human indexation versus the AI is not easy to understand. The second thing is also complexity. People say, oh, now I try to understand things. In fact, when you try to look at what they understand, they didn't understand so much because it's too complex, usually what we deliver, and they're a bit lost at the end. How so they can use it on a long time, not for the first time, but that it really creates a value over time. That's something which is also critical. And then it was also to show the need for a new generation of indicator. To have this, in fact, it's not a work just in terms of design, but I think what makes really the project unique is that we're able to create a framework together with the EDIAP, with Professor Daniel Gatica-Perez from the Computing Social Group, so that it's not a tech-driven innovation, or it's a design or user-driven. It's really putting a pipeline together, the technology, the user experience, and user observation, and progressing together how we can build a full pipeline. So Daniel, I'll let you give you some words about the AI work that you have done.
So Nicolas just mentioned the importance of visual information in the pipeline that has been constructed here. And for that, we used standard techniques in deep learning to characterize images and annotations. So what you see on the left of this slide is what you could consider a query where there's an image and the caption that can come, for instance, from a social media post or from a collection coming from other source. And we have explored standard techniques, as I mentioned, to characterize what's in the image as it relates to the objects it contains, or the type of scenes it depicts, or even the parts of the scene that it contains. Text can also be treated in a similar way using techniques that are out there to characterize the content of the text and be able to ultimately compare it against other information that we have in the database. So this information is used as part of the experiments, and just to give you an example of what this can look like in practice, here we have an image coming also from the Fête des Vignerons that contained this specific caption that was generated by members of the Confrérie de Vignerons, so the kind of information that one could expect to be existing in these collections. And what the machine learning part can add to this is essentially a process of enrichment in which you can actually have segmentations of images being produced. In addition to that, an estimation of what objects are in there with a certain degree of confidence. This is a kind of technology that was tested and implemented in the experimentation that Nikolai just presented.
So to conclude, I think what is interesting in this project is that we try to address key challenges for the media industry, but also I think globally for the democracy and for the technology advancements. We see how technology can lead to innovation. Innovation is about also adoption. I think that beyond its commitment, so the project has really built a relation how we can work together between design research, defining user experience, understanding the key factor of adoption, and the technological advancement, see how we can move together in one pipeline. And now we can look for real implementation, but also academic contribution. And the key factor of success have been really identified because it's really a big challenge. It's a complex challenge to address this notion of perception of trust. And so now we can really open a work towards a new generation of indicator and have much stronger impact for the future for media. Thank you very much.
And I am quite amazed by the way you've all been respecting the timing, which means you all have more time to do some informal network now in the demo space, which is just behind you, and you'll be able, behind the screen, sorry, and you'll be able to ask all the questions on these very interesting projects. Thank you ever so much for these short, brief descriptions. I must say that you have to follow the arrows to join the demo place. That means on your left. And I've also been reminded that we have enough space in the cocktail room. I'm sure that will interest a few of you. That means that if you haven't registered before, you can register now. That will be open, I suppose, Munya, in a few minutes, not quite yet. Is that right? Okay, well, thank you all ever so much and have an excellent evening, and hope to see you next year at the annual event. Thank you.